So it's time to take another look at more Xbox Series X and S enhanced games that you can check out when you're looking for the best visual fidelity, effects, and wanting the fantastic performance that is commonplace amongst these new breed of consoles. And as the next generation gets in full swing, more and more of these games are going to come out. So I need to stay on top of them also. Everyone watching knows which games are going to push their console. Plus, show you how they look and perform, and I'll probably do even more videos comparing these to last gen versions, especially to see how much of a gap there is between the Xbox One X or the base Xbox One and the Series X. But if you like the video, then please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment letting me know which games have impressed you most, share the video, subscribe, and hit the bell notification. Plus, also check the description for a link to the Discord to discuss everything Xbox and gaming. But now, let's check out some feasts for the eyes. Let's do it. So we kick off at number 10 with Monster Truck Championship. And if you're looking for the next best racing game that you should plunge a bunch of time into, then maybe go play Wreckfest instead. But if you have an affinity for monster trucks, racing them around the tracks and trying to launch them off of some jumps and trying to get the best high score, then maybe give this one a try, as it is for sale at a cheaper price. But it could also do with some more meat across all areas, maybe having a few more tracks and just options really, plus a more in-depth campaign. And of course, this is Series X and S enhanced, so it looks and runs better than the last gen counterpart. But unfortunately, you will have to purchase the Series X and S version specifically, even if you have the last gen version, which is never good. When playing, expect it to be at that 4K 60 mark on the Series X, but I did find that the game could stutter quite frequently, especially during the races where there are all of the other drivers as well. But considering it's only 8 per race, it isn't a huge amount, but the game didn't seem to like it with all of the dirt being kicked up, which was a bit of a shame. It just didn't have that perfect performance that I was after that other races do. But if you're after more racing action, then check this out and maybe wait for a sale, or perhaps if it makes the way to Game Pass one day. For number 9, it's the very short Before I Forget, and this, as you can tell, isn't the game to show off the hardware. Not what you'd gravitate towards when looking for Xbox Series X or S enhanced games that will melt your face off. But if you're after something quick to knock over within an hour, and which is cheap, then perhaps give this a try, especially if you're wanting something slower and unique. And this footage on screen is from basically the start of the game, as I don't want to show too much. And what this lacks in graphical wizardry, it could make up for it in the seriousness of its subject matter, which will either make you intrigued or turn you away, as Before I Forget follows your character in their house in the stages of early onset dementia and how it affects someone's life, and the game does a very admirable job in treating the issues with sensitivity and respect, whilst also being able to transport the player into the experience and have enough of a game within it to be worthwhile playing. Now, if you're used to walking simulators, then you'll fit right in. You're here to experience the story, not to walk away from it thinking about how much fun you've had with the gameplay. If at its cheaper price it's still too expensive for you, keep an eye on it in a sale if you're wanting something different. Coming in at number 8, it's another racing game, and it's Ride 4. So if you prefer the two-wheeled variety over 4, then this may be for you, as let's face it, car racing games completely overwhelm the genre. But in saying that, Ride 4 might completely overwhelm you if you're not more of a hardcore racing fan and really have a love of motorbikes, as this can be quite unforgiving at times, as especially if you're new to this type of racer like myself, it's going to take some time to get the intricacies of the sport down and the gameplay, getting used to the weight of the bike and riders when going around corners, as the game is going to ask you to get some good lap times, even on bronze if you're going to progress. So for the Series X, you get the game at a dynamic 4K and 60 frames a second with improved textures and overall detail on the environments, the riders, and of course bikes themselves. It all looks really good and performs great. Now, I like to give my opinion on the games themselves in these videos, where I focus on the graphics and performance, and Ride 4 is an example of a game that I won't be sticking with, and that's got nothing to do with the quality of the product itself, as what it does really well. It's more about my time will just be spent on other games I'd prefer to play. We only have so much time in a day, so if you're into motorbikes and racing, then definitely check this one out. Then at number 7, we have Zombie Army 4 for anyone that likes to team up with friends and have wave after wave after wave of the zombie undead vying for your blood, and in return, you will shoot an absolute truckload of bullets in their general direction as you try and thin the numbers. But Zombie Army 4 has a decent campaign as well, with enough variety between its locations and weapons to keep things moving along, but it really is about playing this with others, otherwise you'll probably lose some interest. And hey, the same can be said with the much loved Left 4 Dead series as well. I wouldn't say there was anything here that blew me away, and that's without playing any of the Zombie Army trilogy beforehand. But like I said, the campaign was decent, but the gunplay itself is quite good, and just the feeling of shooting the weapons and the sound effects were enough to keep my interest for a period of time. Making your way through, trying out the different weapons and upgrading your gear always adds some more depth, but there are a number of games that offer similar things these days, so it will really depend how much you like the genre and zombies. So go into this expecting 4K 60, and it never really seemed to drop any frame during my playtime, but there's also an option for 120 frames a second if your setup allows it. And for number 6 is Enlisted, and just like there's a ton of car races out there, there's probably even more first-person shooters and online ones at that, and I usually tend to favour more modern settings in these shooters, having played a lot of World War I and World War II ones on previous console generations. But I did really enjoy my time with Enlisted, even if the movement and shooting mechanics felt a little bit floaty at times, just wanting a bit more precision, but this will differ from person to person. So this squad-based shooter that takes place on large battlefields from World War II sees you trying to take out the enemies, including the vehicles in which they're in. And one thing I'm not a huge fan of in shooters is camping and waiting, much preferring to be in the action, but Enlisted has a nice mix between the two, where being out in the open and running in guns blazing will ultimately get you killed, but you'll still be moving around instead of just being in one spot, plus using the different weapons of the time period. This runs at up to a 4K resolution, and it generally stuck pretty closely to the 60 frames a second that it targeted on the Series X, but there were a few dips that I noticed. Not a deal breaker, and overall, it's a solid game so far. Check it out if you're after something like this. And for number 5, we have the long-running gore fest of Mortal Kombat 11, and I haven't kept up with this series much over the years. And as I mentioned in another video when I was talking about Killer Instinct, I used to be much more into fighting games in my younger years, with the likes of this series and Street Fighter, but thought I'd check out the 11th installment, and pretty glad I did as well, as it's both really nice to look at, and it's still enjoyable to play all of these years later. The games may have gotten more elaborate and look a hell of a lot better these days, but MK11 still has what I liked so much about the series back then: tight, responsive controls and a cast of characters that are all designed well and have their own personality along with their moves and fatalities. This already does look good on last gen systems, as fighters often do when the stages or arenas are in a confined space and characters are limited to just 2, but the effects that MK11 throws around, the backgrounds, the animation and movement of the fighters, and how each move blends into the next, plus all of the special abilities and everything, it just gets taken up a level on the new hardware. If you're into fighting games, then this is a no-brainer. For number 4, we have Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 remake, and this isn't your standard half-assed remake or remaster. This is an excellent modern day take on the classic games that retains what made those games so damn enjoyable and memorable, and sets a standard for how a remake should be done. Each of the stages looks way better than it could have before, whilst retaining what fans loved so much about them. And that goes for the pro skaters and the ones you create as well, with detail that you could only dream about 2 decades ago. But this remake goes even further by having quick load times, but performance that the new systems can give, as the Tony Hawk remakes never really take any sort of hit to the performance and just remains rock solid throughout, which makes controlling the skaters, complete with much smoother animations, just a joy to control. And as I mentioned in my review, this is a game where you can see pretty much everything the game has to offer in a handful of hours if you played them back in the day. But there's still so much fun to be had here, targeting a 4K resolution at 60 frames a second on the Series X, or even being able to choose to drop that down and hit 120 frames. Either way, the game is super smooth and just a fantastic remake, and the Series S has the same great performance too, just not at 120 frames. At number 3 is the long-running shooter of Warframe, and this is also free to play as well, which I put the spotlight on in a recent video, but now it's also been given the next-gen enhanced treatment, so everything looks and performs better than it did previously on last gen. So of course we have the 4K 60 for the Series X, and the Series S gets the same frame rate, just at 1080p, but the update also gives the visuals a bit of an upgrade with improved lighting and shadows, and Warframe was already a good looking game, just not one that would blow you away all too much, as it has been around for a number of years now, and it does look and play better than ever before on console. But the main reason to play Warframe is to partake in the grind and the hunt for loot as you experience this pretty damn good universe, even if the different storylines which were a part of the updates do differ in terms of quality. There are microtransactions here as well, which don't really get in the way, but as I mentioned, it can be quite grindy, but it is free to play, so give it a go and see if you like it or not. Load times of course have been improved, and the game still plays just as well as it always has. And at number 2 is a Yakuza spin-off of Judgment, which, although different, is just as good as the other games when it comes to story and characters, but now it has the Xbox Series X and S enhancement, which takes an already fantastic and lengthy game and improves it in the visuals and performance. The game runs at a rock solid 60 frames a second, whether you are just running around the city or engaging in combat. It always feels super smooth, and the controls are even more responsive, especially if you're playing at higher difficulty settings and needing to take on several enemies at once. Lighting along with the visual presentation looks a little better overall as well from what I played on the PS4 Pro, and the image quality looks cleaner as well. It isn't a night and day difference from what came before, with the performance being the greatest addition to the game, but it all comes together to just give a much better version of what came before, and now it can be played on the Xbox. This one will most likely end up on Game Pass at some stage, but it's cheaper than full price, so maybe check it out. It's a solid upgrade to an already great game. Coming in at number 1 is Resident Evil Village, the 8th game in the series that has had several ups and downs over its 25-year run. But now we have the next game, and it's great, especially for me who considers the 7th game my favourite due to the first-person view and blend of both action and horror, creating an atmosphere and tension that just fits perfectly with the franchise. So this excellent 8th game in the series runs at checkerboard 4K, which looks fantastic both in the indoor environments such as the mansion or outside where fog, mist and the atmospheric lighting in the sky creates such a good mood. Now the game also has the option of ray tracing for things such as shadows and reflections, and with this enabled you will have some frame rate drops when the action heats up on screen, and it is noticeable, but I wouldn't say it's a large enough issue that left me frustrated for a game such as this. But if you find the dips in performance to be an issue, then simply switch off ray tracing and the game is pretty much a locked 60 frames the whole time on the Xbox Series X. For Series S, I wouldn't suggest using ray tracing as the performance hit is just too great, so switch it off and you get a much better 60 frames a second with just a few dips here and there. Plus the game is at 1440p. Textures lack some detail up close on both systems, but overall the game looks great. So there's more Xbox Series X and S enhanced games to check out, and as the weeks and months roll by, more and more older games are getting enhancements, plus newer games are now coming out as well. But let me know which enhanced games you've played and which have impressed you the most. If you liked the video, then please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share the video and leave a comment as it helps the channel and the video get pushed out to more people. Hit the bell notification to get notified when new videos drop, and I'll see you on the next one.